Lights will guide you home, and I promise I will burn for you. By rayrae118, Chapter 9. The end of term feast took place a few days after Slughorn's party, and for the most part was full of joyous laughter and much shouting. The down note occurred as the main course wrapped up and the desserts appeared. Harry's attention was drawn to the 3 auras that appeared in the doorway. He recognised Kingsley and Tonks, and the third he thought was called Dawlish. He frowned and watched as Minerva came down the aisle to meet them. The foursome had a whispered conversation by the door as more students became aware of their presence. Hermione, Neville and Ginny were likewise captivated by the scene, though Ron continued to eat with gusto as normal. "I hope everything's all right," Ginny muttered anxiously. Harry nodded, biting his lip nervously. Minerva turned away from the auras, her gaze catching Harry's for a moment, before she looked up to the head table. After another moment, Snape stood up, his brow furrowed as he met Minerva at the Slytherin table. "Oh no." Harry's eyes narrowed as the 2 professors stopped next to Blaise and Daphne. Snape gestured for Astoria Greengrass to join her sister, and they held a whispered conversation. It clearly wasn't good news, if the sudden paling of all 3 students was anything to go by. Hermione's eyes were wide as she looked at the gathering at the Slytherin table. Most people were now watching the proceedings with interest. Even Ron had looked up from his plate. Shakily, Blaise stood up, helping Daphne clear the bench as well, and the 3 students followed their head of house out of the hall. Minerva cleared her throat and all attention turned to her. "Please return to your meals." She returned to the head table and descended into a whispered conversation with Flitwick. Harry and his friends looked at each other worriedly, not hungry anymore. Not even Ron. What they had just seen couldn't be good. Harry was anxious, but he waited until the meal was over before following Minerva to her office, gesturing for his fellow Gryffindors to go on up to the common room ahead of him. Minerva wasn't surprised when barely 30 seconds after she had closed her office door, it opened once more. Harry walked in and closed the door behind him. Minerva sighed, taking a seat at her desk. "I'm not sure I should tell you what happened," she said before her charge could say anything. Harry bit his lip. "I'm just worried," he replied. "It didn't look like anything good happened." Minerva sighed, knowing that what had happened was Mr. Zabini and the Greengrasses girls' business. But Harry was their friend, and he would probably spend the whole night imagining scenarios. The Transfiguration Professor grimaced, leaning forward in her seat. "Kingsley, Tonks and Dawlish were here to inform the students of an attack on their families." Harry's heart stuttered. He trailed off, but Minerva understood, and shook her head. "Madame Zabini and Lord Greengrass were injured, but help came in time and the 2 were removed to St. Mungo's. I am sorry to say that Lady Greengrass didn't make it. An aura who responded to the call for help was also unfortunately killed." Harry almost collapsed into a seat. "Daphne," he mumbled, feeling a pressure behind his eyes that threatened tears. He felt for Astoria as well, but he didn't know the younger girl that well. Daphne had told him that Astoria had picked up many of the spells and lessons that she had from passing from their summer training with great speed. But no matter how well or little he knew them, no one should have to go through the pain of losing a parent this way. Minerva smiled sadly. "Mr. Zabini and the Greengrass girls have collected their belongings and left for St. Mungo's to see their parents. I am sure they would appreciate your sympathy, Harry." Harry nodded, sniffing slightly. "If they need anything." Minerva nodded understandingly. "Lord Greengrass and Madame Zabini might need to spend a few days in the hospital. Perhaps I will suggest that their children spend that time with us. They are more than welcome." Harry smiled. "Thanks." He paused. "Do you know why they were attacked?" Minerva let out a deep breath. "From what Kingsley said, The Death Eaters were angry that the two families did not support you-know-who. Harry muttered a curse. In other words, two neutral but slightly darker families decided to stay out of the war, and the Death Eaters attacked because their kids are friends with a boy who lived. Minerva shook her head. You can't blame yourself, Harry. Like you said, they were neutral. They could have been attacked simply for that. Harry shrugged. But it must have been clear which direction they were leaning in after Blaise helped me at the Department of Mysteries last summer. Minerva winced at the reminder. Don't blame yourself for the actions of others. That path leads nowhere, and to nothing but pain and hatred. Please. She swallowed harshly. Voldemort is to blame. Harry's head snapped up as his guardian used the Dark Lord's name. He knew she must be worried about him and what he might do if he blamed himself, because she normally never used the name. He attempted a smile and nodded. I'll try not to, he assured her. Minerva noted the way he said try and sighed softly. She was grateful that he was being honest with her, not automatically giving her the answer he thought she wanted to hear. But she really hoped he wouldn't go on a downward spiral, thinking that he was to blame for his friend's parents' predicament. You should get some sleep, she said, standing up and moving around the desk to give him a reassuring hug. The train leaves after breakfast tomorrow. Harry nodded, returning the hug gratefully before he left the office. Line break. When he returned to the common room, Harry found his friends waiting for him in a secluded corner. In a hushed whisper, Harry told them what had happened. Hermione inhaled sharply, her eyes flying to her mouth, tears in her eyes. Oh no, that's horrible, she gasped. Harry nodded grimly. I think it's because Blaise and Daphne are friends with me. Ginny slapped him on the arm. Harry James Potter, it is not your fault, she growled. Harry winced and nodded. I know, he pacified, but I can't help feeling a little guilty. But I'd rather blame the idiots who actually did it. Ginny grinned and kissed his cheek. Good boy. Ron and Neville snorted, and Hermione let out a small smile. Growing serious, Neville asked, Do they need anything? Is there anything we can do? Harry shrugged sadly. From what Aunt Minerva told me, Madame Zabini and Lord Greengrass will be in the hospital for a few days. She's going to offer for Blaise, Daphne and Astoria to stay with us until their parents are released. I think the best thing is to keep them occupied. Especially Astoria. She's only 14. Maybe they'd like to take some frustration out on a few test dummies. Neville nodded. That could probably be arranged. Do you know which Death Eaters were involved? Harry knew he was on the lookout for any sightings of Bellatrix Lestrange, ever since the woman had escaped with her master last June. He shook his head regretfully. Sorry, but either Kingsley didn't tell her, or she didn't tell me. Ron sighed. We should get some sleep. The train leaves tomorrow morning. They all nodded their agreement, only now noticing the way the common room had emptied out around them, indicating the late time. Harry gave Ginny a kiss, and Ron said goodnight to Hermione, before they all headed up to their dorms. Line break. The train ride was fortunately quiet the next day. Aurors were patrolling the corridors and put an end to any incidents that cropped up. Word of what had happened at Greengrass Manor and the Zabini estate had gotten out, and rumours were running wild, especially since none of the students in question had been seen since the Aurors had escorted them from the Great Hall the night before. A few students had stopped by Harry's compartment to ask him, but he wouldn't give out any information. The only reason he had told his friends was because they cared about Blaise and Daphne as well, and they would have been told the details as soon as the next morning of their circle took place, most likely that evening or the next day. When the train pulled into King's Cross, Harry and his friends disembarked to find a contingent of Aurors waiting for them. He was relieved to see Kingsley and Tonks there, but wasn't too keen on the other people he didn't know. Standing next to them were Molly, Remus and Augusta. Molly smiled tightly, her eyes continuously glancing around the platform looking for threats. "How was your term, Diz?" she asked distractedly. The all mumbled positives, and Molly's expression turned to sorrow. "Right, let's head for the flue access. No dallying now, and stick close together. Luna, you're coming home with us. Your father will pick you up later this evening."
"Where's Sirius?"
Harry asked as they made their way to the barrier between platform 9 3/4 and the Muggle side of King's Cross. Remus bit his lip, looking around.
"He had to take care of some business," he replied quietly. "He'll tell you more later, and he sends his apologies for not being able to pick you up."
Harry nodded as the group started going through the barrier.
"It's fine," he shrugged. "I just wanted to make sure he was all right."
Remus smiled tiredly. The attack on Madame Zabini and the Greengrasses has been stirred up quite a bit of fuss, both in the government and in the community. Sirius has been busy with various members of the Wizengamot, as well as giving some support to the Auras who are investigating the incident. He saw Harry's worry and reached out, resting a hand on the teen's shoulders.
"He'll be fine,"
he reassured his pseudo-nephew. Harry nodded shakily.
Yeah,
he muttered as they reached the flue access and started going through, heading for their homes. Once all the teenagers were through, Augusta went. Molly and Remus turned to the Auras, expressions full of gratitude and worry on their faces. "Thank you for your help," Molly said. "Please tell Amelia that the children are safe and sound, and we will see her soon."
Kingsley nodded austerely. "Will do. You two should head on through, and then we'll get back to the DMLE."
Molly smiled and went through, followed by Remus. Line break. Harry was relieved when Sirius came home in time for dinner that evening. Remus had taken Tonks out for dinner, and Amelia and Susan were eating at their home, so it was just Harry, Minerva and Sirius. Over the meal, the Black Lord told them of what had been going on in his day.
"We've talked a lot about the Wizengamot, Harry, so you understand that there are basically 3 factions right now."
Harry nodded. There had been a lot of lessons on the government, and what would be expected of him when he became the Lord Potter.
"There are usually at least 2 frontrunners who are the face of the different factions. And then the other lords and ladies follow those leaders. Right now there are those who follow Dumbledore, those who follow Voldemort, and those that follow you."
Sirius inclined his head, setting his fork down.
"I would call the faction that I belong to the neutral group. We don't see Albus as the new Merlin, and we don't think Voldemort's got the right idea. Most of those who have given me their support were neutral in the last war, or they leaned to the light side but did not actively fight. Druella Zabini and Cyrus Greengrass both spoke with me to lend their support after my innocence was proven several years ago. Since then, I've spent a good deal of time with them, and shared some concerns over potential Death Eaters not taking kindly to their lack of support. We were in the process of upgrading their wards, and those bastards picked the exact right time to hit. There was a period of roughly 2 hours where the wards were down, and they struck." Sirius shook his head, grimacing. "They had to have had an inside source to tell them when, but we don't know who, and none of the Death Eaters that we caught in the attacks were high enough to give us anything of use." Harry sighed, wishing they had more, but knowing that those working the case were doing the best that they could. Minerva sat down her napkin. "I have already extended an invitation for Blaise, Daphne and Astoria to spend the next few days here, until their parents are well enough to leave. Madame Zabini and Lord Greengrass were most grateful, and accepted the assistance. I will be picking them up from the hospital shortly." Harry nodded. "I'll have Teppy prepare a few rooms for them." He stood up and left the room. Line break. When Harry entered the sitting room an hour later, he was just in time to see Minerva step out of the flue, followed quickly by Blaise, Daphne and Astoria, all still wearing their Hogwarts uniforms. Harry smiled, trying to look reassuring. "Hey guys," he greeted. Minerva smiled at him and left them alone, knowing they were probably more comfortable with Harry rather than their Transfiguration professor. Blaise jerked his head in a facile
of a greeting, but the two girls didn't reply. Their faces clearly showed their shock. Harry wasn't sure if grief had kicked in yet. He bit his lip. "We set up a few rooms for you, right next to mine. So if you need anything, I'm here." "Are you hungry? Have you eaten dinner?" Blaze nodded. "Yeah, at the hospital." Harry returned the nod. "Come on. I'll show you to your rooms." He headed up the stairs. "Do you have your things?" Again Blaze was the one to respond. "Professor McGonagall shrunk them for us." Harry nodded again and gestured for them to show him the shrunken luggage. After they did so, he pulled out his wand and unshrunk the 3 trunks. "Won't you get in trouble?" Astoria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her gaze was focused on the trunks, though she hadn't actually looked at him since she had arrived. Harry shook his head, putting his wand back in its holster. "Just a little secret these two already know." He replied, whispering conspiratorially, "The wards block any magic here, just so you know." He winked and was pleased when a ghost of a smile made its way across her face. After showing all 3 their rooms, Harry gestured down the hall. "The bathrooms are the 3rd door down. Kitchen's all the way on the ground floor, and through the double doors, if you get hungry." He gave directions for Astoria's benefit, since Blaze and Daphne had spent a good deal of their time here in the previous summer, and knew where most things were located in the castle. He looked at the 3 teenagers in front of him, noting their suddenly anxious expressions, and he sighed. "I have a better idea. Why don't you all get changed into pajamas and come into my room? We'll have a sleepover." Astoria perked up a little, grateful for the chance to not be alone, and disappeared into the room Harry pointed out for her. Blaze and Daphne considered for another moment, before they nodded and went to go get changed. Harry headed to his room and pulled his blankets off the bed, moving them over to the sitting area that his suite had. He set up some pillows, stripping the sofa and chairs that were there, moving everything to the floor, before he changed into pajamas. When the others joined him, they all made themselves comfortable on the floor, cocooning themselves in blankets. Talk was sporadic for a few minutes, before Harry suggested that they get some sleep. He knew it wasn't likely they would actually get much rest, but they should try. Line break. Harry wasn't sure at first what had woken him, but the view from the window. It wasn't yet dawn, so why had he been pulled from his slumber? A soft sniffling drew his attention, and Harry raised himself up slightly, looking for the source. Astoria was curled up in a corner, her knees drawn to her chest, and her head buried in her arms. Her shoulders were shaking slightly, and Harry knew that she was crying. Without another thought, he got up quietly, hoping that his movements didn't rouse Blaze and Daphne, still sleeping next to him. Astoria flinched slightly when Harry sat down next to her, but didn't raise her head. Harry settled himself, but didn't speak, hoping the younger girl would come to him. A few minutes later, Astoria sniffled and looked over at her host. Harry's profile was calm as he sat completely relaxed, his knees bent and his arms resting on them. He wasn't looking at her directly, but she imagined that he was observing her out of the corner of his eye. "I miss my mum," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. Harry nodded sympathetically. "Me too," he admitted, his voice just as quiet. Astoria looked at him sharply, and Harry sighed. "I wish I knew what to say to make it better, Astoria. I really do. But the truth is, I don't think that hurt ever goes away." Astoria's crying started anew, and Harry reached over, resting a hand over hers, squeezing gently. "I barely remember my parents. But even when I thought they were drunks who died in a car crash," Astoria gasped, and Harry grimaced. "Long story. Anyway, the point is, even when I didn't know who they were, who I was,
I still missed them. There's a hole in my heart that could never be filled, because my parents weren't there to hug me, to tell me they loved me, to cheer me on at Quidditch, or praise me for my grades, to ground me for having a girl in my room. Astoria giggled, and Harry smiled. I never got to have that awkward talk with my dad about girls. Sirius is great, but it's still something that I should have shared with my dad. I wonder if he would have told me to go for it when I felt ready, or if I should wait. I never got to experience what having real parents is like. My aunt and uncle hated me. Even though Sirius and Aunt Minerva are wonderful, they're not my mum and dad. And by the time they took over guardianship for me, I really wasn't a child anymore, no matter how much I wish otherwise. Harry sighed. I wish I could tell you how to make the hurt disappear. I wish I could tell you that someday you won't miss us so much. I wish I could tell you that it gets better. But I can't, because I don't think it will. I think the best thing I can tell you is that it will get easier. Astoria swallowed, willing her tears to stop as she leaned into his side, taking comfort in his steady presence. Harry reached out and drew her closer, his arm sneaking across her shoulders. After a few minutes, he felt Astoria's breath even out, and knew that she had fallen back asleep. He himself dropped off shortly after, and when he woke again, the sun was rising above the Quidditch pitch, and Blaise and Daphne were stirring. He nudged Astoria, and the younger girl groaned, opening her eyes and blinking blearily as she looked around, slightly confused at the position she found herself in. Harry smiled. Why don't you use my bathroom? Take a shower, whatever else you need. Flick will make sure you have a change of clothes ready by the time you're done. He referred to the house elf that normally saw to his needs at the castle. Astoria nodded and stood up shakily, her legs a little wobbly after spending hours in the same position. Blaise and Daphne were awake now, and Harry made his way over to them, starting to collect the blankets and pillows. You guys should go get dressed. Breakfast will be probably ready by the time you're done. They nodded and went back to their rooms. They had been given to find a change of clothes. Line break. Most of the morning was spent quietly, with the teenagers spending some time just relaxing after a hard term. Apparently the healers had told them that they should spend the day away from the hospital, and their parents had agreed, not wanting them to be depressed by the surroundings. By mid-morning they found themselves in the library, Astoria working on some school assignments, while Blaise, Daphne and Harry found them a few books to lose themselves in, wanting an escape from the harsh realities of life all around them. Harry looked up startled when Daphne sat next to him on the love seat he occupied. Blaise was curled up in a chair nearby, and Astoria had claimed a table, with books and parchment spread out around her. Harry had smiled at the similarities to Hermione, but then Astoria was one of the best students in her year, so he figured it only made sense. Daphne looked uncomfortable as she played with the book in her hands. Thank you, she blurted out suddenly, her voice quiet so as not to attract attention of the others. Harry furrowed his brow. For what? He asked curiously. Daphne shrugged. For letting us stay here. And thank you for what you said to Astoria last night. Harry blushed. I didn't know you were awake, he admitted. I just wanted to help her. But I don't know if what I said was comforting. Daphne nodded. I think it was. I think both of us would have slapped you if you had said that everything was going to be alright. Our mother's dead. She said it so bluntly that Harry winced. It's not going to be alright. So, thank you for not trying to sugarcoat anything. Harry smiled slightly. Anytime. Daphne smirked lightly. Yeah, I know I can count on you, to be honest. It's a quality I really admire in you, Harry. Harry looked embarrassed, and after a moment, Daphne's expression turned serious. Do you really think we'll feel that hole our whole lives? Harry sighed, rubbing his chest absent-mindedly. Yeah, I do, he said truthfully. Some days will probably be worse than others. Birthdays, holidays, anniversaries. Now that I'm older, and I understand more, and even remember my mum's death, I think a lot about future events. How my mum won't be there to help Ginny shop for a wedding dress. How my dad won't be there to stand next to me and crack jokes as I tear up, watching Ginny walk down the aisle. I won't get to tease him as he sobs unabashedly while holding his first grandchild. My children will never know their grandparents. I missed out on so much, and it hurts. What I told Astoria was true, Daff. That feeling will probably never go away. How do you deal with it? Daphne asked, her voice close to crying herself. Harry took a deep breath, by remembering what I have now. 2 guardians who love me, an adoptive family who accepted me right from the start and always looked out for me. More adoptive siblings than I know what to do with. I don't have my own family, but I made one, and that's going a long way in lessening the pain. I think, even if I had grown up with Sirius and Remus, and I had always known who I was, who my parents were, why they weren't with me, I would still feel like something was missing. They were a part of me, and that didn't go away when they died. He sighed again. Daphne, your mum will always be part of you and Astoria. It will hurt. There will be days when you just want to curl up and forget the world. The important thing to do is remember that that feeling won't last forever. It will get easier. And don't forget her. I barely knew my parents, and I worry about things I don't know. Sirius has been good at sharing stories, but it hurts that I don't know things. Not the big stuff, but the little things. What was my mum's favourite food? What was my dad's favourite colour? You had time to learn those things, Daphne. So, while it sucks, just try and be thankful for the time you had. And if you find yourself forgetting, just look in a mirror. Look at Astoria. Your mother is a part of you. And that will never change. Daphne had tears running down her cheeks by the end of Harry's speech, but she was smiling slightly as she leaned over and hugged him, before muttering an excuse and leaving the room, ostensibly to find a bathroom to clean herself up. Harry swallowed tightly, turning his head back to his book, running a hand over his face to try and lessen the burning in his eyes. He had never really dredged up all those feelings before. Sure, he and Sirius had commiserated over stories of his parents, but he had never gone so deep, telling someone about all his regrets, and all the pain from not having his parents with him. He loved living with Sirius and Aunt Minerva, especially when he could compare it to Vernon and Petunia. But even though they were great, they couldn't replace his parents. Not that they've ever tried to, which he did appreciate. He knew the Greengrasses would be facing some difficult times ahead. It would be hard for Daphne and Astoria to go through all the things that they should share with their mum, and not have her there. When they needed to talk about boys, who would they turn to? When they got married, who would help them plan the wedding? When they had their first child, who would reassure them that they didn't need to go to the hospital for every little kick the baby made? And that wasn't even getting into what Cyrus Greengrass was facing. He was now a single father with 2 teenage girls. In the blink of an eye, their whole lives had changed. Harry wondered if there were any females in his life that could help out whenever Daphne and Astoria needed someone to talk to. He hoped so. In the blink of an eye, their whole lives had changed. And Harry knew
He would do whatever he could to help them. But he couldn't do everything. The green grasses would need to figure a lot of things out, but Harry vowed to himself to be there for them, however and whenever they needed. End of chapter. Hi guys, I hope you enjoyed that. Very, very sad one, that one. Oh god, poor Daphne. Poor Astoria. And poor Blaze too. I mean, his mum's hurt. Oh boy, that was hard. And I wanted any of you to know, if any of you are grieving, you're not alone. Okay? No one's actually ever really alone. There are more places to turn to than you want. It's perfectly okay if you need some time. It's natural, okay? Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe and hit that bell to get notified whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Take care.